Greetings to you all on this feast of the Holy Trinity. Today we celebrate our one feast that is not an event nor a person, but rather a doctrine. And today the church once more expects the preacher to lead the congregation to a better understanding of the three persons of the Holy Trinity and her work in our world. And I can offer some thoughts on that, but that is not all we have on our plates at this moment, is it? The church expects more bravery out of me today than that. Seminarians are told over and over that they must prepare to preach with the Bible in one hand and at least 2 newspapers in the other. And if we do not, we are failing our congregations. Today, my problem, as I prepared, was that there's too much to talk about, too much I need to talk about. So much that I scarcely can decide a main point, how to begin or how to end. But I will tell you this, my ordination vows compel me to give it my best try. So we begin. When a starting point eludes me, I often rely on my brain full of hymns. And usually I begin to ponder a sermon. As I begin to ponder it, one hymn will bubble up to my consciousness and start playing the pertinent portion over and over and over in my head. And this time, the hymn happens to be one that does pertain to the Holy Trinity. It pertains to all creation singing praise to the Holy Trinity, ye watchers and ye holy ones. It's found in your hymnal 1982 at number 618. This hymn is really a paraphrase of the Latin Te Deum. You all know the hymn tune as it is also associated with all creatures of our God and King, which is very familiar. What I heard in my mind over and over was the words of the very first verse of Ye Watchers and Ye Holy Ones. And that verse lists all the members of what we call the hierarchy of angels. The 9 types of heavenly creatures, created beings who have certain responsibilities, created beings other than humans. You know about the seraphim and the cherubim, but then we have these other 7 more beings, the thrones, the dominions, the princedoms, the powers, the virtues, the archangels, and the angels. In this hymn, all of these beings are crying their praises out to our God, the 3 in 1. Their importance is said to, by tradition, to be in ascending order, which puts the angels at the bottom. In this hymn, all of these beings are crying out. But what grabbed me as I looked at this list, because I knew it was there, what grabbed me in this familiar list was that 4th being, the dominion. We have a creature called a dominion, praising the Holy Trinity. The first reading for this day is the creation story from the 1st chapter of Genesis. And there, right there, at the beginning, at the very beginning, God grants human beings dominion over the animal kingdom. We know that humans have not simply seen this as that kind of dominion that was stewardship over or authority over, because authority always carries with it responsibility. But humans have often seen this dominion as just raw power. I want to suggest that we have taken dominion, something that God says was good, a good thing, and warped it. We've warped it into a system that's called the domination system. Much of my thought is based on the work of the theologian Walter Wink. Some of you have probably read some of his most famous books. But Walter Wink explains, and often in here I'm going to quote him, the New Testament is thoroughly familiar with the domination system, and it has specific terms for describing that system. They're Greek words. There's the Greek word cosmos, which in our translations is world. There is ion, which we translate as age. And there's sarx, which we translate as flesh. Those three words. We have other definitions for some of these words, but the New Testament usage is unique during that period of time. These words refer to the human sociological realm that exists in estrangement from God. When they talk about the world, that's estrangement from God. Or sarx, the flesh, estrangement from God. Or of that age, estranged from God. Consider this example. Here Jesus, using this word cosmos, which when we read the Bible, we read as world. Here Jesus used this to name the domination system. When we read in John's Gospel where Jesus is being challenged, he's being challenged in his authority by the Pharisees because Jesus, is attacking their religious order, the order of the Pharisees. And so the Pharisees challenge him about that. And here's what Jesus says to them. You are of this system. I am not of this system. If we translate that word cosmos to mean the system. You are of this system, Jesus says to the Pharisees. I'm not of this system. When we translate it, this word as world, which is what we usually do, we misunderstand Jesus sometimes to be otherworldly or not really a human. But what Jesus is saying is that he belongs to God's cosmos, God's system. He was not of, and he distinguished himself from, the domination system. The domination cosmos, you could call it. So the problem that is exposed in the New Testament is that people who belong to or buy into the domination system can't even comprehend the values that Jesus displayed in his life and that he taught, or even understand why Jesus is trying to turn their world upside down. When the domination system set in Germany, in Nazi Germany, the author D.H. Lawrence described it. He said he described a spirit-killing atmosphere that penetrated everything, teaching people what to believe, what they could value, and even what they could see. Whatever the system tells the brain to believe is what is allowed to be noticed, and everything else is to be ignored. And in this way, people are taught to mistrust their own experiences. The German people knew that their neighbors, their Jewish neighbors, were being loaded up on trains, but they didn't see it because the system wouldn't let them. In his critique of the Roman Empire and the Jewish hierarchical structure, Jesus said to them, "For judgment I came into this cosmos, into this system, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind." Here Jesus is speaking of these religious authorities who believed themselves to be spokesmen for God, but who had in fact reduced the Jewish religion to like an exclusionary male club that was for only what they call the morally upright, the keepers of the law, and the financially privileged who could afford to pay money to the temple. And the judgment was, Jesus said, here's the judgment, was that the light has come into the system and the people love darkness rather than light. That's the judgment. The vast majority of humanity to this day is enthralled to this system, the domination system, the system that Jesus wants to break us out of. God's system, which Jesus refers to as a basileia, a kingdom, is based on truth rather than on the delusions of the system. Those delusional assumptions that the Apostle Paul talks about in the book of Colossians in the 2nd chapter. And we have to ask ourselves, have we bought into the domination system? How are we going to know whether we have or not? Here are a few of the delusions that tell you if you have bought into the domination system or not. These come from the writings of Walter Wink. Number 1, the need to control society and prevent chaos requires some to dominate others. The second one, those who dominate may use other people as a means to achieve their goals. The third, a valued end justifies the use of any means. As long as we get what we want, we justify it. Violence is redemptive, and it's the only language that enemies understand. In other words, violence is going to bring about good. We're going to kill all these people and then we'll have peace. Violence is the only language enemies understand, and it's redemptive. Money is the most important value. Money, economy. Ruling or managing is the most important social function. How about that? Therefore, if that's true, rulers and managers should be rewarded by extra privileges and greater wealth of all kinds. Those who have military strength, who control the most advanced technology, the greatest wealth, or the largest markets, are the ones who will survive and who should survive because they've done that. Property is sacred, and property ownership is an absolute right. Institutions are more important than people. And there is no higher value or being or power than the state. If there is a God, God is the protector of the state and a patron of the state. Those are all delusions that will tell you, if you believe them, whether or not you have bought into the domination system in some way or all ways. Now, here's the thing. Nations are divided, and we're usually divided by propaganda. And propaganda changes from time to time because it suits a particular situation. But what has not changed in 5,000 years are the delusional assumptions that I have just named. People have bought into those delusions for 5,000 years. These delusions are commonly held, and they actually unite nations in mutual ways because they buy into the same thing. They're antagonistic because their quest is for domination of the other, but they all believe that. We in the United States have had the domination system on full display in these last days. You couldn't miss it. Most recently, in the murders of people of color by neighbors, by law enforcement, and above all, by the obscene use of the military, who actually sprayed pepper spray and rubber bullets and gas of some smoke of some kind on peaceful protesters and good Episcopalian Christian people and Episcopal clergy who were out there to minister to people who were just protesting, in order to clear a path for the president to march over to St. John's Episcopal Church and desecrate the Holy Bible like it was a prop for a photo op. It appears that the visual of walking alone was intended to emphasize the message that might makes right. And this administration plans to assert dominance. They've used that word, dominate the towns, the governors were told. Not only over looters and rioters, but anybody who gets in the way. And somehow, this was to baptize, I will call it, the militaristic inflammatory remarks that he had just made over in the Rose Garden. That's the domination system in full display. There it was. The very first delusional assumption that I read to you. The need to control society and prevent chaos requires some to dominate others. Dear friends, be aware. The nationalism, which is the worship of the nation, that has gripped so many people in our country, it's not a political phenomenon. It's a religious phenomenon. And its followers have bought into this myth of redemptive violence, like I was talking about, a belief that violence is necessary and appropriate when it's administered by the state. It's almost like we have two views of Jesus. Disciples of Jesus are meant to live as ambassadors and signs of God's peace. Quite the opposite of adherence to redemptive violence. But if enough people worship the beast, that's what the book of Revelation calls the empire. If enough people worship the beast, we have a public that's immune to truth. Studies show that people, worshipers, don't surrender their beliefs in the presence of facts that disconfirm what they believe. They don't surrender their beliefs. They just simply adjust their beliefs to neutralize the facts, to make them not important or not exactly right, or some kind of semantics are wrong. I guess those are those alternative facts that we hear so much about. Brothers and sisters, we follow one who has told us that it is only the truth that sets people free. You know that peacemaking is not for the faint at heart. That's for sure. But it is the prophetic call of the believer who wants to live in God's system. The church has no more important task. We certainly have no more important task than to expose the delusionary assumptions that underpin the domination system. They're all part of what Revelation calls the dragon's game. Just another name for Satan. So if the main pillar of the domination system is living into its lies, then living into the truth is a threat. It's a fundamental threat to the domination system. The truth is. Jesus says, I'm not of that system. We disciples of Jesus are not of that system. As Bishop Buddy, the Episcopal Bishop of the Diocese of Washington, D.C., she said, I'm quote her, right now our primary focus is the reason behind the protests in our country right now, the fundamental reason behind them. She was, of course, speaking of the racial inequities and the murders, even by our very own police, and the myriad injustices that persist for people of color, and all the accompanying pain that contributes to poorer social circumstances and poorer health care and harsher punishments and assumptions of guilt, all those things. We are not of that domination cosmos. We are not of that system. We are people of faith and trust in the grace of God and God's love for all people and the whole creation. The gospel teaches us that we need not fear because we're held in God's embrace in life and in death. I feel like we've only cracked open a tiny bit of what needs much deeper consideration and much deeper study. But if you take nothing else away from this sermon, take this. The victory of faith over the powers of the domination system lies not in immunity to their wrath, but in emancipation from their delusions. Think about those delusions that God wants to free us from. Do not live in the system that lies to you. Live in God's system. Amen.